So I'm at the Pantheon and I found quite a few Sacred Hearts here out in the wild in their monumental form. And I think you might enjoy checking these out. So I mentioned that in the monumental versions of the Sacred Heart, a lot of times Jesus's hands are free to take different positions. And they're frequently, I said, outstretched. And so we've got quite a few examples of that. But we also have here quite a few examples or counterexamples where you see Jesus pointing at his heart, either with two hands, like you see here, or with just one, like you see here. So this guy needs a paint job, but you can see the sculptors are using the position of Christ's hands to draw attention in these cases to the heart, which is probably a function of, so these are pretty small monuments. And because of that, and because of the lack of color contrast for the most part, you can use, right, the lines of the sculpture to draw attention to that heart that might not otherwise be visible if you are looking at a distance. So here's an example where you can see that making the Sacred Heart legible as such is quite a bit easier when you're working with a larger sculpture. So I talked earlier about the association of the Sacred Heart with Eucharistic imagery. And we can see right here that we've got a chalice and the crown of thorns. I'd be really interested to see the date on this. But we've got this incredible drapery. And hands opened in the Aran's position. And you can see all the detail that this sculptor has put into the Sacred Heart. See the flames coming out of the top and the rays of light, as well as a lot of detail on the crown of thorns, and you can see that cross. Now, so here's another example where the sculptor is using the position of Jesus' hands to point out the heart. In fact, this might be a copy of the other one. I'm sure they use some of the same molds. But let's take a look at a counterexample right here. So here we see that the artist has used red and gold paint to draw attention to the Sacred Heart in addition to the position of the hands. So all the motion, his head is looking down and his arms are moving in. So all the motion kind of directs your attention to that Sacred Heart. Up above him, we have another counterexample. In this case, his hands are spread out, but the lines, you see how the lines of his arms actually draw attention back into that heart. And they've used, again, red and gold to make it really pop. So here's another example where the artist has used color to draw attention to the Sacred Heart. Here we get the wounds. And I got a couple more. Let's take a look at a couple more that are around the corner here. All right, here's another example where the artist has used color to draw out the Sacred Heart. And in this case, we've also got color here on the pedestal. And you can see it, the texture kind of looks like clouds. And sometimes this sphere that the monumental Sacred Heart is standing on, or the monumental Jesus is standing on, is understood to be the globe. And here we can see it's interpreted as clouds. In this one, we can see again both the use of detail, the use of the tilt of the head, and the position of the arms to draw your eye into that Sacred Heart. Even the lines at the folds at the top of his shirt, push your eye down, and at the bottom, above the belt, push your eye up into the Sacred Heart. And again, at the bottom, we have some of the instruments of the Passion and some Eucharistic imagery. All right, here's an example where the artist is using the position of the arms to draw attention to the Sacred Heart. And also look at that gaze. One of the striking features you remember of the Battini, or the sort of second version of the Sacred Heart, are these piercing eyes that may be looking directly at you or just slightly indirect so that they're not quite threatening. And here we've got, let me zoom in again for you. Here we've got dark spots for the eyes so that you can, the gaze is really visible from out here. There are others, and I'll show you an example in a minute, where the gaze is there, but because of the medium and the techniques the particular artist chose, the gaze isn't quite as visible or legible at a distance. If you remember on the Italian prayer card, sometimes the Sacred Heart is a super feminized Jesus, and the tradition gets criticized because of this at length. But here we have an example of one of those. Okay, I promised to show you an example where the gaze is present, but it's not immediately obvious because of the techniques of the sculptor. And so I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see this Jesus really is looking straight at you. It's a little unsettling. Okay, with this one, I want to draw your attention to the spherical base, but also this one's kind of a mystery because you can see he was holding something, but who knows what. This is one of my favorites. I think I like his wide, high cheekbones, and the way that the Sacred Heart protrudes out of his chest. But also, if you look at the hands, they form just a lovely triangle that pushes your eye up into the heart. And if we back up, there we can see that the flow of his robes forms a shape kind of like a mandorla. In other words, like an almond shape. Here's another Sacred Heart, and this one I really like because there's a really strong use of yellow and green. So it needs a paint job, but you can see, one, we get that nice direct gaze, or semi-direct gaze. It's a little less threatening. He's got clear eyebrows, and the artist has used green paint to make that crown of thorns pop, and red for the heart, and yellow so that you can see the light and presumably the fire. I think the fire's coming off the top of this one. You can see by these lines. And then you can also see there's a little bit of color too on the right hand of Jesus, on the left side of your screen, to indicate one of those wounds. I think this one's a real treasure. It just needs a little bit of work. Okay, over here we have a medallion. This is a really cool medallion because it has the characteristics of the monumental Sacred Heart. So you can see how the heart is emblazoned on Jesus' chest and how he's in a posture similar to what we've seen in other sort of monumental versions, where you've got one hand toward the heart and one hand in an action of blessing. So it really fits the space and your expectations about the Sacred Heart, even though it is in small size and medallion form. Okay, so we're coming up on a really colorful example of the Sacred Heart where the artist also used sort of a big protrusion of the concrete in order to draw attention to that Sacred Heart. And you can see that we've got gold around the heart. We've got the crown of thorns. We've got a fire coming up out of it, and the fire, it comes up out of his chest, as does the cross of the top. And if we look in closely, we can see here that there are these lines that draw your attention down toward that fire, may have indicated light coming out of the heart. And again, we see a painted Jesus where the gaze stands out. And here we also have a gray headed Jesus, which is very unusual. And I suspect that we're not looking at the paint color that the artist had in mind, but rather we're looking at primer. And I think that the weather probably has taken off the hair and beard and so on, the colors of this Sacred Heart. So that about wraps this up, and I hope that you've taken this time to think a little bit about how artists think about making the Sacred Heart legible, especially in its monumental form and in different sizes, like you see um, in a graveyard. And I hope you've also enjoyed getting a chance to see lots of different varieties of this monumental form of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and that it helps you attune your eye to seeing Sacred Hearts in the real world.